On today's Locked On Canadiens, now that Patrik Laine is a Hab, where do the rest of those other dudes play?
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 1130. And we thank you all for making us your first listen of the day as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. My name is Laura Sab, also known as the Active Stick, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host Ian Boisvert, also known as Maybe It's Ian. And Ian, before I ask you how you are, I have to remember to tell everybody we are on Instagram now, everyone. I keep forgetting. We got Instagram like 2 weeks ago, and then I keep forgetting to mention this. Locked On Canadiens on Instagram. You can find us. You'll find reels of our shows. You'll find graphics that, Ian will most likely be the one creating. You'll find all kinds of stuff. We're going to, we want to interact with you guys on there. You'll be able to DM us mailbag questions if you like. Locked On Canadiens on Instagram. All right, now that that's out of the way, Ian, how are you?
I mean, it's a Friday after the Montreal Canadiens traded for one of my favorite players. So I've been on a cloud for the last 72 hours. These have been great.
I too have been on a cloud, but we'll get to that later in one of the mailbag questions that we received. I did want to say though, so on Monday we will be doing our dissection of the Habs draft video. Ian has seen it. I have not yet seen it. I literally just got home and we started recording. So if you have not seen it by then, spoiler alert for the Monday show. We're going to be getting into that. We're going to be talking also a little bit about some of the Habs theme nights that they're talking about on the schedule. And we'll get really, really into all of that on Monday. But today we have so many mailbag questions. Ian, you've prepped them. Why don't we get right into that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the week of a big trade, it's fitting that we're sort of living in the aftershock of that and trying to figure out where the rest of the pieces go, right? Because this was already a pretty full roster,
right?
And now we've added another mouth to feed, so to speak. So, it's a lot of the questions we got were focused around the idea that, hey, there's a lot of dudes here now. What happens next?
Right.
I'll start with our friend DF Pendries. They ask, Laine is likely going to bump someone out of a spot. Do you trade someone now? And if so, who?
Okay.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, people are saying that there's too many players on this roster. That is absolutely objectively true. Are there any players that actually don't fit? Clearly there are. I think Christian Dvorak and Josh Anderson are glaring examples of players that no longer have a fit on this team. It's unfortunate, but it's true. But they also, where they are in their careers and how much they get paid, like it's probably going to be very tempting to try and play them and like kind of force a square peg into a round hole, or is it a round peg into a square hole, whatever the saying is.
Neither one fits.
So I think at this point, like what Kent Hughes could be doing and not necessarily should be doing, but I think this is an option, is, he's got a lot of picks, he's got a lot of prospects, maybe package something and get rid of at least Christian Dvorak.
Yeah, that's one option. I want to jump to another question because I think it helps answer this first one from Massimo. A lot of people are saying there's not enough room up front for guys like Waugh or Heineman with the addition of Laine. What do you think is more likely? Hughes using a pick to offload a bad contract, like you just said, or sending Anderson to Laval to try to find his game like they did with Armia? And that's a thought I did not have until I read that question. And I think that that's entirely likely. Because, I go back to what Arpon Basu asked Kent Hughes during his media avail after the trade, where he asked, are you going to be able to get under the salary cap with Carey Price not on LTIR? Well, you can bury, it's like $1 million and change, I think, or maybe it's just $1 million flat in the minors. And hey, would you know it? That probably makes them fit under the salary cap, or at least gets them pretty close. So, I mean, if Josh Anderson shows up and has the kind of camp that Yoel Armia had last fall, I think that's entirely possible. Laura, I don't know what you think about that. Do you think it's possible
Sorry.
for you good?
I was literally just trying to. I hate that cap friendly's gone because I was trying to see if there were any terms and conditions attached to Josh Anderson's contract that means that he can't be sent down.
He has a no trade. He does not own a no move. The no
All right.
move would stop him from being sent down. He is entirely able to be sent on waivers. It's similar to what the Rangers did with Barclay Goodrow, right? Earlier this summer, they tried to trade him. He said no. They said, fine, you're going on waivers, and the team that was going to trade for you is going to pick you up. That's sort of what could unfold, although we'll see what actually happens. But I love that thought.
Yeah, I do really like the idea. And what I should have done was actually, rely on my co-host who's always like over prepared for every show and been like, does Josh Anderson have an NMC on his contract? Instead, I tried to find cap friendly, which does not exist anymore. But yes, these are some bloopers that you might find on our Instagram, Locked On Canadians on Instagram. All right. So I think it's a really intriguing prospect. I think one thing with Josh Anderson though, which may work, is that tough love kind of scenario, because he's very down on himself. And I'm trying to remember sort of with Armia, he had a season where literally everything that could possibly go wrong when he was on the ice did, right? Or when he had cursed. The puck did. Yeah, he seemed cursed. And he really was able to turn that around with that short stint in Laval. So I don't know if Josh Anderson has that same ability to, or will he just sink further into his own depression, So there is definitely a concern there, but I think it's a really, really intriguing idea. I think it's an interesting idea, but I do think that there's probably some GM or other who still believes in the idea in a guy who is big and can skate fast and can't do much else. And they think that that is the holy grail of the NHL. So, I do have faith there will be salary retention. There's no, I think on any of these guys, there will be salary retention. So I think that's really, really intriguing. But also with Emil Heineman, like this is kind of unfortunate because it does not give him an opportunity to crack the NHL lineup. Not saying never. I'm just saying he's most likely going to spend most of his time in Laval.
Yeah, agreed. We'll keep going with DF Pendries. I'll paraphrase this next question. Will the Canadiens' efforts in social responsibility from not having Jordan Harris on the team, given the leadership role that he had in that sphere, he was very active in his community. He was very vocal. Do you think that leaves sort of a vacuum?
What often is a vacuum or an open position is always an opportunity. So I do think that Josh Anderson, Jordan Harris was very strong in that respect. He was very vocal. All his answers, all of his conversations were very thoughtful. He was a strong advocate for not just people like himself, but people who were less fortunate than he was, right? So I think maybe there's not another person on the team that has that ability to speak so well on issues. But I think in terms of putting in time and effort, this is an opportunity for someone else, right? And Patrik Laine was very upfront in his press conference about how he and his fiance wanted to give back to the community, right? He had mental health issues, right? So that's something that, there's a new player coming in. He's really focused on giving back, but he wants to endear himself to the fans and be part of this community. That's an opportunity for him. But then it's pretty much anybody. And I think one person who's underrated on these things is Samuel Montembeault, because I feel like he's extremely he's got this ability to be thoughtful and articulate in all of his responses. If you missed our episode with Jay, Samuel Montembeault is a hockey player who seems like he can read. So, I think with Jordan Harris, I think he had that background and he had that experience in doing so, and he felt very comfortable doing it. So I think it's an opportunity for the Canadiens to push another person out of their comfort zone, and make them part of the community and make them have a positive impact on the community. What about you? What do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, well said across the board. I think if your team's voice on this is one player, you're not doing a good enough job, right? So if Jordan Harris leaves and we stop hearing these kinds of things, I mean, Nick Suzuki just had a golf tournament where he raised a bunch of money for service animals, right? This is not Jordan Harris was not the monolith here, right? there's a team here that does care about, you know, the community in Montreal and people of, you know, different abilities, different backgrounds. You know, so I don't think that this dies with Harris on his way to Ohio. I think the team still cares a great deal about this sort of thing.
Yeah, and I do think though it is like Columbus did gain someone who can hit the ground running with any kinds of initiatives like that, and can really speak to the community as well. So I think, you know, that's a positive. All right, so we've got so many more questions, and a lot of them are centered around Patrik Laine. One of them is apparently centered around my life, so we'll get into that in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. Folks, if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is a hiring platform that takes all of the mess out of trying to hire. When you're trying to search for a candidate, the best way to do it is not search at all. Don't search and match instead with Indeed. Really the only thing that you should be using. Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent survey. So I can tell you that hiring is one of the most difficult parts of any job, any kind of managerial job, any kind of employer job. You need the right people to do the right things for you. And trying to find them is really hard, and you do need help doing that. For all of you who are trying to hire, listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, let's talk about more mailbag questions. What have you got in the I was going to say in the pipeline, but no, it's like literally in front of you.
Yeah, there's a couple more things from the whole idea of players jockeying for position that I kind of wanted to touch on before we moved on. At Riley Montreal asks, bad hot take, feels as though Jayden Struble's emergence made Harris expendable. Agree or disagree? Personally, I don't think that's a bad or hot take. Like, I think that
I think it's true.
We saw it with our eyes, right? Like Jayden Struble's meteoric rise last year made it you know, because let's say it happened in the inverse. Let's say Jayden Struble came in, didn't play so well. Maybe he's on his way to Columbus right now, and Jordan Harris is still Montreal Canadian, right? Like, I think that is entirely reasonable. I don't know what you think.
Honestly, like from my perspective, I feel like it is truly reasonable. I think the only thing that slightly concerns me with Jayden Struble is that Jordan Harris was this way in college.
Yeah.
Jordan Harris was this way in the pros, right? Jayden Struble he really broke out once he got to the NHL for parts of a season, or not parts. It was a consistent long part of a season, right? So that's the only thing that gives me pause. But otherwise, I feel like his emergence absolutely made the Habs step back and say, all right, we've got these defensemen. We can package them for stuff, or we can send them over for stuff, you know. And so they traded with the Devils and they traded with Columbus, and they ended up getting Patrik Laine.
Yeah.
You know, it's a tidy piece of work, as we keep saying.
Yeah, completely agree there. And I wanted to get to one more thing from Claude Sauvé, who sends us always very thoughtful emails. I won't be able to read the entire question, but it's very well written. I'll jump to the chase here. My question is, at what point does the embarrassment of riches of their prospect pool result in cannibalization? For example, Harris depriving Hudson of an opportunity. I think this might have come in before that trade. So, hey, they fixed one. Struble versus Engstrom, potentially. Barron versus Mayu. Beck versus Kapanen. Tuck versus Jekai. Like, there's a bunch of, you know, competitions that are going to break out over the next year or two, right?
Yeah.
Are you worried about, like, guys not being able to get their fill in the NHL?
No, not at all. I think what's going to happen, like for me, what I'm worried about is them making the wrong decision, right? So, you know, there's definitely players that would fit in a particular role or position on the team. And if there's multiple players, eventually they're going to package them for assets. They're going to trade them. They're going to do something, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, the closer they get to next season and the season beyond, right? Like they sent a message that they want to make the playoffs this year. None of us expected that before the trade, right? Then you're thinking about next year and you're thinking about Demidov. You're thinking at that point, it's time for them to start adding win now type players. So I'm just worried about them making the wrong decision, like hindsight's 2020, right? Like they pick the guy thinking that he's going to be the right guy, and then he ends up being like very injury prone, and the other guy thrives, right? So that's what I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about players not getting opportunities, because I think that they would force those opportunities in order for them to be able to make those decisions. Like I think that this year they're definitely going to be doing a lot of experimenting, a lot of rotating, which is not great for some players, but it's a huge opportunity for others.
Yeah, and Kent Hughes alluded to as much, right? In the trade availability. He said, they asked him about creating space for, players coming in. And he said, he doesn't really want to just create the space for the sake of having it, because he wants these players to earn NHL roster spots, which I think is the right way to go about it. Remember back in the day when they had Joel Ward on a PTO, and he was basically there to be like the stick at the grocery store that goes on the conveyor belt. So you separate groceries. Like if you can't pass him, you're not a Montreal Canadian. Like if you can't outplay Joel Ward, it's not going to work out.
Right.
We don't have that sort of, I know Eyes on the Prize used to use the Blunden line, right? So we don't have that kind of player because there's just too many of them, but it's that sort of concept, right? Is like, they're not going to give you a spot. You're going to earn it. And I feel very confident in their ability to make that decision. All right, let's jump into some would you rathers. There's a couple that kind of fit into this category. Bren Meadoff, who wants to correct us. I think last time we called him a Gallagher fan account. His name is Brendan. So Brendan asks, Habs are down by 1 with a minute left, and in the attacking end, which 6 guys are on the ice?
Oh,
let's limit it to this year's roster, right? Let's limit it to who's going to be on the ice this year. So Demidov is not an option. So because we're going to be in situations like that this year, right?
So wait, what's the scenario? They're down a goal.
Down a goal, minute left. You have a face-off in the attacking zone. Who's on the ice?
Nick Suzuki, obviously.
Correct.
Patrik Laine.
Correct.
Cole Caulfield.
Bet.
Okay, so now we've got 3 more players, right?
Yeah.
Who are we putting there? Lane Hudson.
Yeah.
Lane Hudson's going to be there. And then I don't know. I feel like we need another forward and like a token defenseman who can be. I was
gonna go Slav and Doc.
Nice.
Like I think that's like if you're putting together a hero line, that's probably what it looks like.
Yeah.
Maybe at the beginning, like let's say this happens in October, it's probably Matheson instead of Hudson, but maybe by the end of the year, it's Hudson instead of Matheson.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're at a point where there's not too many players to pick from. There's definitely more than in years past, but. I think that's going to be a pretty easy decision for them when they're down in that sort of situation.
I like that. Like there were 2 players I didn't mention that you mentioned, and they're as good or better than the players I mentioned, right? Like this is not like, it's not a dearth of like skill that
our cup runneth over. This is it's a good thing to have. All right, we'll stick in the Locked On Network. Locked On Sharks, our friends Locked On Chompy Boys. Would you rather have a playoff game this year or a top 3 pick?
Interesting.
It's really tough.
It is, but you know what? I think top 3 pick.
Yeah, that's where I'm leaning to.
Because a playoff game this year, like the Habs are aiming now to make the playoffs. It's going to be exciting for them. It's going to give us something to cheer for in the spring. It's going to, I find that the games are going to be so much more meaningful the closer we get. Like if they do make the playoffs, I still think it'll be like eking in and not necessarily like dominating or, it's going to come down to the wire. So it's going to be an exciting season that way. But if you're giving me the choice in a year where they're not expecting to contend for the cup or even like make it past 1 playoff round, unless they're meeting the Leafs, then I really think that top 3 pick is my preference this year. If you ask me the same question next year, no.
Yeah, it's the psychological experiment that they do with kids, right? Is like, if I'm going to put a marshmallow in front of you and you can take it now, but if I come back in the room and it's still there, you'll have 2 marshmallows. Like that's the sort of thing that's being asked here. And I would rather have the 2 at this point.
Yeah.
So we're on the same page there. One last question before we head to our 3rd segment. The only number retired in the Locked On rafters is Scott Matla, and he asks if there was a battle royale with cheese, as in like cheese is fighting in a battle royale, which cheese is winning it all?
Oh, that's tough because I feel like battle royale is like it's based on brawn, right? like its strength, and obviously all the outcomes are like written in advance. But with cheese, like I feel like a strong cheese isn't necessarily like a brownie cheese. Does that make sense? Like the
Yeah.
strongest cheeses are very crumbly and
Yeah.
and what do you call it? Unripened and all of that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I'd probably just go like a nice wedge of parm, you know?
mm,
That's sort of where I'm at. I'm not a big experimenter with cheese, so I'd keep it fairly simple.
and then for me, it's gonna be brie because
Yeah.
it's probably like one of the heaviest cheeses, right?
Yeah. Those are Rushmore cheeses for sure.
I love it. Also, I love it that Scott Matla's jersey is in the rafters, because what I was going to do is I was going to say Scott asks, R.I.P. Scott. Scott
Yeah.
asks. That was going to be my plan. All right, we're going to get back into the hockey talk though in just one moment, because we have a lot of Joshua Roy, yes, Joshua Roy discussion to do, and that's coming up in just a moment. But first, the weekend is upon us, and you might want to go to an event or a baseball game or something, something fun to do. So what do you do if you want tickets at the last minute? You check out Game Time. Game Time is a one-stop shop. It's got so much stuff. It's got tickets for every event that's near you, or even in a different city. You can definitely do that. And they absolutely take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets. Really, like, it's just so easy, because they have all in pricing. Honestly, that to me alone is worth the app, because I hate when you buy a ticket and then there's like $80 in ticket fees. So you never get surprise fees at checkout. You can get the view from your seat before you purchase. They have a lowest price guarantee. They've got ticket coverage. They've got everything. And it makes it so much easier to curate all the stuff, to keep an eye on like the ticket that you're watching, grab it at the right price. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, we have some Joshua Watt talk to do. It's been a while.
It has, and I think that everyone's mind is in the right place right now, and that okay, we have this big forward, and Joshua looked primed for a middle six, maybe top six role this year, and now it seems like that is in jeopardy, if not entirely gone. So there's a couple of things here. Xander B on Twitter kind of phrases it in a different light. Do you feel that this trade will ease the expectations and chair positioning of Joshua Watt? And is this the best outcome for him and his progression? Which I think is a really like half glass full view of this, which I like, there's no wrong answers here. I think that especially him being a hometown kid to have that sort of, okay, you're not going to be the guy just yet. Why don't you just focus on being a pro? I don't have any issues with that sort of outcome for Joshua. Wow, what about you?
So for me, it also depends. There's a couple of things, right? Like, can you play a player on his off wing? Is he talented enough for that? What does he do, right? Like, does he? So because that's an option. That's always an option. But like you said, that might increase the pressure on a guy in this market. I don't know. I think the way that this goes for Joshua Watt absolutely depends on how he sees it, right? If he sees it, as you just said, a glass half full, then it's going to be okay. Like, he's going to be an above average third liner, right? And if he doesn't see it this way, and there's pouting and there's sulking, then the Joshua Roy narrative gets written a different way. He ends up in a different team. He couldn't make it in here in Montreal. He wanted out, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really like, I think a lot of it is dependent on him. Do I think that he's not going to get opportunities? Not at all. But like, tell me this, like, what if the Canadiens have 3 good lines? Is that the end of the world? Like, when you are contending, like when you're playing for the promise of a Stanley Cup every single postseason for the next 7 years, do you care if you're playing on the third line?
Yeah,
I don't think so, because your team is good and is threatening and could potentially win the cup.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe I'll phrase it this way too. Do you think he's an everyday NHLer at this point in his career? Like he's not going to be riding the bench. He's not going to be in the press box. His days in Laval are done. Like, is that the kind of career arc, the point of the career arc that we're at for Joshua Wall?
I think so. I absolutely believe that. And I think, the other thing too is you have to remember that Patrik Laine has had a lot of injury issues, right? So there's opportunities for him there, whether they want to rest Laine, whether Laine has, needs to recover from something. And again, I'm not predicting injuries. I don't wish that or predict that. But having Joshua Roy is a weapon. It's a backup. It's an insurance policy. So, and it's entirely up to him and the team. Like, I don't think this makes him expendable. I do think it alleviates the pressure.
Yeah. A similar one from Boondoggle, and I think this one will be kind of quick. Why isn't Wash showing up in Habs projected lineups on the internet, but Alex Bear-Brulé is on every projected fourth line? Why would we not dress a guy with offensive talent when the team needs scoring? I think these things just go to default. Like, I don't know that there's any rhyme or reason for that. Anyone kind of setting projected fourth lines in August, it's all guesswork, right? Like, we're just out here trying some stuff. Like,
yeah, that's exactly it. We're throwing stuff at the wall, and then none of it will stick anyway because we're not the ones making this decision. It's Martin St. Louis. Right. Boondoggle had a couple other questions about my car. I don't have the car yet. Fingers crossed this time next week I will have the car. That's my life update, Boondoggle. Also, life update, we have an Instagram account. Please check out Locked On Canadiens on Instagram. Follow us, tell your friends. We're going to have stuff on there. And I think that would be actually a good place to put bloopers.
Yeah. All right, let's do two fun ones and head off into the weekend. Kyle Roberts, friend of the show, he first responded to our thoughts from the last mailbag. He says, if your knees bend in the opposite direction, wouldn't they just fold into your lap? This was, of course, the question. If our legs bent the wrong way, what would our chairs look like? Instead of folding under your legs, they would fold over them. We'd probably have more space, saving seating, like a pillow on the ground, or we'd sit at a table on the ground. That's probably the right answer. I really appreciate that correction.
Yeah.
The second part of this was, as for Price's number being retired, I'm all about it. However, a silly follow-up to it, when we retire all the numbers and we don't have enough to fill a roster, what would you like to replace them with? Triple digits, letters, symbols, hieroglyphs? My favorite answer to this comes from one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Futurama, where the New York Mets have all of their numbers retired, so they start wearing fractions. That to me is the funniest. Like someone in the program, like, you go to a game and you open it and there's someone who's 5/8. I think that's pretty funny.
That's really funny. I thought for me, I think hieroglyphs is really funny because I'm just trying to picture like an announcer saying that during the play-by-play. Like we're trying to guess what these hieroglyphs mean. So that's really, really funny. Like anything that's like a lost language or something that it's all guesswork at this point. That's what I would like.
Yeah. Yeah. That seems to be a real concern for people. Like, well, we can't retire all the numbers. And it's like, guys, we haven't retired. Like the last player who played in Montreal that we retired, I think, was Patrik Laine, which was 30 years ago. Like, we're not doing this all the time. Anyway, that's a story for a different day. One last question. We're going to circle back to our friend DF Pendries. If you could change any NHLer's name, who and to what?
Oh my God, that is an excellent question.
I have an answer for this, and it's because I was talking about it the other day. At what point is Dougie Hamilton old enough to just be Doug Hamilton? like, can we be done with Dougie? Is that possible? Like, or is it like on his birth certificate, his name is not Doug or Douglas, it's Dougie?
Yeah. I think like honestly, like, why do you go by that if you're an adult? Like, literally, why? I mean, I know Martin St. Louis goes by Marty. It's very different. Marty still has a bit of gravitas to it.
Yeah. The only other one I could think of is like, Sidney Crosby. He's Sid the Kid. Do we call him Sidult the adult now? Like, do we change things like that?
Or like you have this thing where like every couple of years NHLs just change their names. They trade names with each other. Yeah. And so we all have to figure out who they are now every few years.
We got to do the old XFL thing where they were allowed to wear their nicknames on the back of their jersey. Like the one that I always go back to is a guy who his nickname on his jersey was He Hate Me, and they ask him why, and he goes, because he hate me and he hate me and he hate. It's so like it'd be so funny.
So good.
Yeah.
That's so good. And then like everybody like changes their name to a nickname, and Arbor Jackeye just leaves his like as is. He's like, I'm Jackeye.
Yeah. There's nothing better.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. All right, that's it for our Friday mailbag. We hope you had fun. And we certainly did. And for more fun, check out Locked On NHL. Make that your second listen of the day. They've got so much going on. We promise you they're covering all kinds of stuff. And there's a good likelihood one or other of us will appear on the Monday show now that the Montreal Canadiens made a massive trade. Check out Locked On NHL. In the meantime, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Canadiens. You can find my co-host at Maybe It's Ian. You can find myself at The Active Stick. Check out our Instagram, Locked On Canadiens, and also lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com for any mailback questions. Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic week with a big trade, all kinds of optimism. We love it. And we have more of that coming next.